So we are on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph, and we had seen the Mishnah yesterday. The theme of the Mishnah is that there are certain things that you're not allowed to begin doing Erev Shabbos that may cause you to stoke the coals on Shabbos. So a number of these things involve cooking, right? Because you want to hasten the cooking so that you can have the meal Friday night. Other things involve stoking a bonfire so that the flame won't go out, and you'll make sure that you have the heat and the warmth that you need from the fire. So we had seen that when there's a concern that you're going to stoke the flame, such as when you're cooking eggs or meat over an open fire, you're not allowed to, you have to make sure that the food is cooked before Shabbos to prevent you from stoking it to cook it further on Shabbos. And when it comes to a bonfire that you're using for heat, you have to make sure again that the fire catches, it ignites properly before Shabbos, so that you won't be tempted to stoke it because you see it's about to go out on Shabbos. Okay? So that's the common link in all of these cases that we saw yesterday in the Mishnah. So the Gemara's question, first of all, is Vikama. Vikama is going on the first case, which means that you have to make sure that the things that you're roasting, the meat or the onion or the egg, are roasted before Shabbos in order to be able to allow them to continue cooking on Shabbos over the fire. And how much do they have to be cooked? So, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rav, Kedei sheyatzulu miba'od yom k'maichel ben drusai. They have to have been sufficiently cooked to the point of the food of ben drusai. Rashi gives us the background. Ben Drusai was a highwayman, he was a robber, and he used to be on the run. He was a fugitive from the law, and so he would have to eat very quickly. So he would eat and run. He would roast his meat very lightly. Rashi says it was a third of the way. There are other Rishonim who say half of the way. And as long as your food is cooked that much before Shabbos, you're okay. But if it's only partially cooked, not even K'maichel ben Drusai, then you have a problem. You're not allowed to continue this process into Shabbos. I've always wondered to myself, what did Ben Drusai do to be Zocha, to have this halacha named after him? I mean, he's a ganuf, the guy. He's a bad guy. Why should we name a halacha after him?
Maybe it's the only thing he did wrong.
Maybe he gave lots of tzedakah, right? Yeah. So who knows?
Yiddish ganuf.
Or maybe he was nice to his mother. You never know.
Maybe that's the only thing he did wrong. Everything else he did right.
Everything, yeah. He wore tefillin. Anyway. I'm saying, the truth is, it's a serious question, by the way. It's not, it sounds funny, but it is a serious question. But something just to think about. Anyway, Itmar Nami, Amar Ravasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Shu K'maichel ben Drusai, Ein Bo Mishuv Bishulei Nocher. That a related halacha, now this is Yoredeya, this is not Hilchah Shabbos, but as long as the food is partially cooked to the point of ben Drusai, were you to give over the food now to have a Gentile resume the cooking process, there would be no problem of Bishul Akum because it's been partially cooked by a Jew. Tanya Chananya Omer Kol Shu K'maichel ben Drusai Mutter Lahashos Al Gabe Kira V'Afal Pish and Grufa Ktuma. Going back to Hilchah Shabbos, we have a brisa that says that as long as it's cooked K'maichel ben Drusai, then there's no problem of Shehiyah, which is remember we learned this term Shehiyah means that you're not allowed to put something on an open flame Erev Shabbos, whether it's in the oven or on the stovetop, unless the flame is covered. As long as it's cooked K'maichel ben Drusai, then the flame does not have to be covered. In the terminology of the Gemara, it has to be grufa uketuma. Grufa means the coals have to be shoveled out, swept out, and ketuma means ash has to be placed on top of the coals as a reminder to you that you may not stoke them on Shabbos. What we do is we cover the flame and we cover the knobs of the oven. That's the way we make sure that our ovens are grufa and ketuma, which is why the traditional blech not just covers the flame, but it has a lip that covers the knobs as well. When my wife, I've instructed my wife, and this is, I believe, the proper practice, that when you put up a cholent in a crock pot, you have to, some poskim say that the liner, the shell, I should say, is like al gabe ha'esh, and therefore you should put a piece of foil to cover it. And other poskim don't have a problem with that, but this is my Kabbalah. And then you should put a piece of foil over the knob, just to cover the knob, or put a piece of tape, whatever it is, because the knob also is considered to be al gabi ha'esh as far as the temptation to be mechata b'gecholim, as you may stoke it. How do we stoke flame? We adjust the knob, right? Wax paper, yeah.
The crock pot, though, people should know that the heat also comes from the side, not just the bottom.
Yes, right. So you have to cover the entire interior of the... You should cover it with something, yeah. Put a piece of paper over it, a piece of masking tape, something like that. But even so, electricity is considered Aish also. Okay, let's go.
I didn't understand. Where's the first? Where did you say the first piece of foil goes?
To line the interior of the.
In between the two parts, the crock pot comes out. The heat inside between the two.
Foil, right into the metal part.
Yeah,
the shell in?
to cover the metal. But the shell is the outside, and the crock pot is the inside. You put the foil and you line the interior of the shell with foil so you're covering the fire.
What about in oven? If you're putting the
ovens are problematic because in oven there's no way to cover the fire. Yeah, the ovens are considered al gabi ha'esh, and so the only way to use an oven on Shabbos is if you have it on a timer or have a Shabbos mode, and you have to put the food in before Shabbos. Right? You can't put the food in on Shabbos to heat in an oven. There's a problem of something that we haven't talked about yet, which is called chazara, which is a totally different halacha. And that has there's a different reason. There it's not because of Shema Yechata B'Gecholim. It's a whole different takana, which we'll talk about later when we get to it in the Gemara.
Shabbos mode today on these electronic ones is really yontif.
It's really yontif mode, that's right. So that's why I say it has to be put in before Shabbos. Okay, that's another issue. We'll talk about that. Ein nosnin es hapas v'chulei. The next thing that we saw is that you're not allowed to put fresh dough to bake in the oven before Shabbos unless it forms a crust first. And we had a machlokus between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanakama said it's just got to form a crust, and Rabbi Eliezer said it's got to form a crust on the bottom. So the Gemara's question is, Yiboyelu tachton heich degabi tanur, oldima tachton heich degabi ha'or. So the Gemara's question is, what is considered the bottom of the bread? Is it the part that's facing the airspace of the oven? Is that the bottom, or is the bottom, the tachton, is that the part that's against the wall of the oven? So Tashma Rabbi Eliezer Omer Kadesh Yikru Paneha Medubakim Batanur. The Brisa clarifies that that's the part that is touching the wall of the oven. And this is like, remember our Dr. Laffa case, right? It's the part that's touching the wall of the oven bakes afterwards. According to Rashi, the crust begins to form first on the part that's exposed to the airspace of the oven, and then only afterwards does the crust form on the part that's touching the wall of the oven. And as a result,
I would have guessed that.
Rabbi Eli, I wouldn't have guessed that either, but someone said, yes, it's true. I saw my wife baking barekas, he said, and it became brownish on the top part before it became brown on the pan. Right? So basically, that's the, because I guess it depends on the heat source. If the heat source is from the bottom of the oven, so
also,
then,
I think the air is what oxidizes it underneath. You won't have any
there you go. Okay, so very good. In any event, so that's the Rabbi Eliezer is therefore machmir that it has to be even more baked than the Tanakama. Next, Mishal Shalanes HaPesach, we had seen that it's permitted for the people who are making their korban Pesach as part of a chabur, as part of a group of people. They don't have to make sure that their korban Pesach lamb is cooked before Shabbos because they'll remind each other. So my time mishum de bnei chabura's reason hain. It's because the members of the chabura are diligent and they're going to watch over each other, and they'll make sure that no one stokes the coals. Halav hachilo. So you mean to tell me that if you're not part of a chabura, then you're not allowed to cook your lamb or roast your lamb on unless it's cooked before Shabbos. Don't you remember we learned a couple days ago that lamb meat, when you're cooking or roasting it in an oven, even if the door to the oven is not sealed, you don't have to worry about Shema Yechata that you may come and stoke, because we know that opening the door and allowing the cool air to rush in will damage the quality of the cooking of lamb, because lamb is a very delicate meat. So therefore, why should you have to worry? Even if you're not part of a chabura, you shouldn't have to worry because you're not going to open the door of the oven. So the Gemara answer is Hasam mintach hachalo mintach. Explains the Gemara. There's a fundamental difference. When your lamb is cut up into pieces of meat, so then the cool air that rushes in when you open the door of the oven damages or compromises the quality of the cooking. But if you've got a whole lamb, which is the way you're supposed to roast the korban pesach, even if it's inside an oven and the cool air rushes in, it's not going to affect the cooking because it's all intact. And therefore, people would normally be tempted to open the door to stoke the coals. And that's why, if the only exception is if they're part of a chabura for the korban pesach, since they're diligent and they're involved in the mitzvah, they'll remind each other, and it's not a problem.
This idea of stoking the coals, is it more a problem with gas ranges, because gas is like an open flame?
Halacha l'maisa, it makes no difference whether it's electric or gas. And in some respects, electric ovens are more problematic. But in some certain respects, they're less problematic. But we won't go through a full shir on that now. And another thing that we said is okay is by the Kohanim. That the Kohanim who are in the space Hamokad, where there's a bonfire for them to warm themselves up on the cold winter nights, we had said that it's no problem even if the bonfire has not completely is not completely ignited before Shabbos. It's not a problem because they'll remind each other. So minahani mili. How do we know that it's not a problem to have only partially ignited bonfires in the Beis HaMikdash? Amar Rav Huna lo sevaru eish b'chol moshvosechem yatamavir avalatamavir b'meduras Beis HaMokad. So Rav Huna learns it out from a pasuk, which sounds like it's a deoraisa dikadim, which he says, the Torah says that you're only not allowed to burn fire in your dwelling places, but in the dwelling place of Hashem, the Beis HaMikdash, you are allowed to burn fire, and that's what allows us to only partially ignite a bonfire before Shabbos and allow it to continue igniting on Shabbos. So maskif la Rav Chisda yachi afilu b'Shabbos nami. Rav Chisda says if you're citing a pasuk that excludes the prohibition of lighting fire on Shabbos from the Beis HaMikdash, so then even on Shabbos you should be allowed to ignite a bonfire. Why does the Mishnah say you're only allowed to ignite the bonfire before Shabbos? According to this pasuk, you should have a free pass to do whatever you want, even on Shabbos. Ela Amar Rav Chisda kraki aslu mishrei evarmu pedaramu da'asa. The Kohanim's reason hey. So the Gemara says no, it's not based on a pasuk. The pasuk that you just cited, Rav Huna, that's telling me that I'm allowed to burn karbanos on Shabbos. Even karbanos, perhaps, that started burning on Erev Shabbos, and maybe from the korban tamid of Friday afternoon, I'm nevertheless allowed to burn the pieces that are remaining over Friday night. I can continue burning those, because the Torah does not prohibit the burning of karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. But all other kinds of burning, let's say for the warmth of the Kohanim, that also is usher, even in the Beis HaMikdash. But rather, just like we had this issue of diligence when it comes to the Bnei Chabur of the Korban Pesach, so too it's the principle is that the Kohanim are diligent. They'll watch over each other, and they'll make sure that they're not going to allow anyone to stoke the flame. That's the issue, and that's why they're allowed to ignite it before Shabbos, but they can't ignite it on Shabbos itself. But when you're outside the Beis HaMikdash, you're by yourself in the privacy of your home, you have to make sure that the bonfire or the flame that you ignite for warmth in your fireplace, is fully ignited before Shabbos in order to allow it on Shabbos, because otherwise we're worried you may stoke it to prevent the fire from going out. So the Mishnah had said you have to make sure that the majority of the fire has taken hold, has been ignited. The majority of the fuel has been ignited. So my Ruban, what is the definition of the majority of the wood? Amar Rav, Rov kol echad ve'echad. So Rav says that you have to make sure that the majority of each and every piece of wood that's in the fireplace has ignited. And Shmuel Amar Kedei shelo yomru havi eitzim naniach tachtein. And Shmuel takes a more holistic view, and he says you don't have to check every single piece of wood, but rather you just have to make sure that the totality of the firewood that's in the fireplace is sufficiently ignited such that at the point when it's lich benching, no one would say, listen, I think we need more kindling to feed the flame. Let's get some more wood to put underneath this fire because it may go out. As long as you look at the fire, and it looks like it's solid, it's not going anywhere. So then you're okay. Tana Rav Chia l'siyuei l'Shmuel, that Rav Chia brings a brisa to support Shmuel's holistic view, which is as long as the flame is independent and you don't have to worry that you're going to need to feed it, because it says in regards to the menorah that's in the Beis Hamikdash, how much does the Kohen has a lighter. He has a candle that he's going to use to light the flames of the menorah, the individual candles of the menorah. So the question is, how long does he have to hold the holder by each wick before he can pull the holder, the lighter away? So Kadesha Tei Shalhebes Ola Me Eleha Velosha Tei Shalhebes Ola Al Yedei Davar Acher. He has to hold it so long such that the wick of the individual candles in the menorah are independently burning on their own without the support of the lighter. And once you can ascertain that that's taken place, you can pull away your lighting candle, and you're fine. But what you see is the principle is that once a flame is independently healthy, then you're okay. Then you're on steady ground. And the same thing is true with Hilchos Shabbos. Like Shmuel says, as long as the flame is independently healthy, it's not in danger of going out, then you're fine.
That's where we get that famous word about the Talmud, the Rebbe and the Talmud.
There you go, right? There's a lot of Musar that you can, an inspirational Torah that you can get, right? The Rebbe has to ignite the student until he can stand on his own 2 feet. He can't pull away any earlier. But then, of course, you can't smother the flame either, right? It's a vort in parenting, too. Eitz Yechidi. Now, what if you have only one log? You have one log in your fireplace. How much of it has to catch? How much of it has to be ignited in order for you to be okay before Shabbos? So Rav Amar Rov Avyo, the Amrila Barov Hekefa. So Rav says the majority of the diameter, in other words, the flame has to penetrate into the wood so far that the majority of the diameter has ignited. And some say, no, even if only the circumference, the exterior of the log has been ignited, as long as the majority of the circumference is ignited, then you're okay. So Amar Rav Papa Ilkach Binan Rav Avyo Binan Rav Hekefa. And therefore Rav Papa says we require both. We require that the flame has penetrated, like the wood is split because of the heat, and the fire has penetrated into the diameter, and also that it has to cover the majority of the circumference. And the Gemara says, Kitanai, this is a machlokas tanoim. Rabbi Chia Omar, ad kedei sheyishaches ha'etz memeleches ha'uman. And the question that is discussed in how much does the fire have to take hold. So Rabbi Chia says that it has to be so much that the wood, the fire log, is so burned that it's no longer usable for construction. A carpenter could no longer use this wood, which means the fire has penetrated on the inside. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Kadesha Tochaz Ha'esh Mishanei Tzadadin. And Rabbi Yehuda says that all you need is that the fire has to be visible on both sides on the exterior, which means the majority of the circumference. So you see, it's the same machlokas. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira further says, even though I can't prove it to you from Psukim, I have sort of an allusion to this idea from the pasuk in Yecheskel, which says, "Shenei kitzosav achla ha'esh, the tocho nachar hayislach lemelacha." That if you have the two sides on the exterior of a piece of wood that have been ignited by fire, even if the interior is just dry, but it is not ignited, still it cannot be used for work. So you see that the pasuk is only makbid on the exterior circumference of the wood being ignited and not the interior. Now we have another pasuk in Yirmiyah from chapter 36. This pasuk in the Sefer Yirmiyah is talking about an episode with King Yehoyakim, was one of the last kings of Israel before the Churban Bayis Rishon. And it says over there that the prophet Yirmiyahu was he was trying to tell people, hey, you guys got to do tshuva, the end is near, right? And no one wanted to listen to him. And Hashem instructs Yirmiyah, go ahead and write down all of the prophecies that I have given to you up until this point, and write them down on a scroll. And then you should read this scroll to whoever's willing to listen. So they bring Yirmiyah and his scroll before Yehoyakim, and Yehoyakim takes the scroll and he tosses it into the fire. He doesn't want to know of this gloom and doom kinds of prophecy, right? And this was considered to be a terrible aveira on Yehoyakim's part, because he should have listened to the Navi. So the pasuk says, "V'ha'ach lefanav meva'eres." it says that the ach, which is some kind of fire, was burning in front of him. So my ach, what does the word ach mean? Amar Rav achvana. Rav says that the word ach means achvana, which is another word for arava, for a willow branch. It's, I guess, in Aramaic for a willow branch. And basically he had a willow branch burning in front of him that he threw the scroll in. Ushmuel Amar Eitzim Shenidlaku be'achvana. And Shmuel says, no, it was a much larger pyre that had been ignited. The kindling of that large bonfire was from willow branches. There was once a fellow out in the marketplace who was yelling, "Who wants achvana?" And it turned out that he was selling arava. So you see that that's what the word means. Amar Rav Huna, kanim ein srichin rov, ogdan srichin rov. So Rav Huna says now as follows. He says that if you have bamboo, bamboo is very flammable, much more flammable than wood. I guess it's got to be dry. But as a result, you don't need, as long as they're separate pieces, you don't need to ignite the majority of the bamboo like we learned by wood before Shabbos. But if they're bundled, then you do need to ignite the majority, because when they're bundled, you don't have as much air to feed or to fan the flame. And therefore there's the same risk of it going out and your temptation to stoke it, just like you have with wood. And in a similar vein, gar'inen ein tzrichin rov, but nasnan b'chosolos tzrichin rov. When it comes to date pits, they would dry out date pits and they would use them as fuel. So date pits, if they're individually scattered, again, you have a sufficient oxygen around them, so if you ignite, they're very flammable. If you ignite them even partially, that's fine before Shabbos. But if you put them into a basket and they're all grouped together and there's not enough airspace, so then when you ignite them, you need to make sure that the majority of it catches fire before Shabbos. So maskif la Reb Chisda adarabba ibcha mistavra. So Reb Chisda challenges this from a physics point of view. I guess, these guys are arguing about the physics of flame. He says just the opposite makes sense, because kanim mivadran, agdan lo mivadran, gar'inan mivadran, nasn b'choselos lo mivadran. He says, look, if you have scattered bamboo, it's much less likely that it's going to catch flame and stay strong. The flame will stay strong because they're scattered. And so therefore you have more power when it comes to flame, more power with a larger amount of fuel grouped together. And the same thing is true with the date pits. Better that you put them in this basket, this palm leaf basket, so that they'll be grouped together and there'll be a stronger fire. So if anything, he would say it should be just the opposite, that when they're grouped together, that's when you don't have to make sure that the majority is ignited. It's only when they're scattered do you have to make sure that the majority is ignited. So itmar nami. So now we have a statement that sort of creates a compromise between the two. Amar Rav Kahana, kanim sha'agdan srichin rov, lo agdan ein srichin rov. But gar'inen srichin rov, nosen b'chosolos ein srichin rov. So the compromise is like this. Bamboo, we're going to stick to our original position. Because bamboo is large and long, even a single stick of bamboo, if you ignite it, you're okay. It's very flammable and it can burn on its own. But if you group them together and bundle them, so then there's always a risk that it'll go out because there's not enough space between the bamboo sticks in order to let the flames fan. But when it comes to date pits, they're really tiny. So therefore, if you ignite one as a single unit, there's a much greater risk that it's going to go out. But if you ignite them in a basket, since they're grouped together, and now you have a much more fuel that's gathered together, so then there's a greater chance that it'll stay ignited, and therefore only then, when it's in the basket, do you not have to worry about it being majority ignited before Shabbos. Tani Rav Yosef, Arba Meduros Ein Srichin Rov. So Rav Yosef says, in a similar vein, that there are 4 kinds of fuel sources for bonfires that do not require the majority to be ignited before Shabbos. What are they? Shel Zephis, Shel Gofris. Zephis is pitch, Gofris is brimstone. Shel Gevina, that's a strange word. So the annotators change the girsa. The Grot changes this to kira, which is wax, and Vishel Revav, which is, Rashi says, it's a certain kind of fat that is made from animals, right? Animal fat, anything that melts. So because these are flames that are extremely combustible, they don't need to be majority ignited before Shabbos. B'masnisa tana, afshel kash v'shel gevava, the Brisa says that straw and stubble or hay also does not need to be majority ignited because it's very combustible. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, eitzim shel bavel ein srichin rov. So Rabbi Yochanan says Babylonian wood does not also is very combustible, does not need a majority to be ignited before Shabbos. So what is this Babylonian wood? So Maskefla Rabbi Yosef Maihi. So Rabbi Yosef challenges, what kind of wood are you referring to? Ilay Masilti. If you're telling me that you're talking about wood that's cut up into very small pieces, Hashda Pesila Amar Ula Hamadlik Tsar Shiadlik Barov. Hayotze, silti mibaya. He says that's not enough of an argument just because the pieces are small. He says because when we're going to learn about wicks, we're going to learn about a certain kind of wick that's made from fabric, and even though it's very combustible, you still have to make sure that it's the part of the fabric that's outside the fuel has to be majority ignited. So surely the same thing should be true even by tiny pieces of wood as well. So Ella Amar Rav Yosef Shucha de Arza. So he says, what is it referring to? Shucha the Arza. Rashi explains is that there's a certain kind of silky material that's between the bark and the wood of the trees that grow in Bavel, and this kind of silky material is extremely combustible when it dries out, and that's the stuff that doesn't need to be majority ignited before Shabbos. Rami Bar Abba Omar Zaza. Rami Bar Abba says it refers to Zaza. If I'm reading French, Rashi's Old French correctly, Rashi calls this mulch. And mulch is not just small pieces of wood, but it's actually like, it's mulched wood. And that's...
It's moss.
He calls it moss? Okay. Arswell calls it moss, so maybe I don't know French. So that's... Rashi calls it mulcha. I thought he meant mulch, but maybe it's moss. Okay, fine. All right, Hadron Allah Yitziyas Shabbos, and Mir Hashem will come back to you. So now we go to the famous Bameh Madlikin, which we should all be familiar with. The problem is we're familiar with saying it, but we don't know what we're saying Friday night. So let's now, especially if we say Kegavna, right? Then we really don't know what we're saying. So let's find out what Bameh Madlikin is all about. So Bameh Madlikin and Bameh Ein Madlikin. With what may we light and with what may we not light Shabbos Licht, the Shabbos candles. Now part of this Mishnah is going to talk about the wicks, the material of the wicks, and part of this Mishnah is going to talk about the material used for the fuel. So we'd like to request also, again, even the phones that just make a very brief sound, if we could just have those turned off before the shir would be very helpful. Thank you. My mind is a little bit feeble, so even when there's just a tiny little sound, it throws me off. Okay, thank you. Ein madlikin lo belechesh, velo bechosen, velo bechalach, velo b'tzilas ha'idon, velo b'tzilas hamidvar, velo v'rokash al pnei hamayim. That's the first part of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah talks about the things that you may not use for the wick material. And the Gemara is going to go through and define what lechesh and chosen and kalach and psilas ha'idon and psilas hamidbar and the yeroka shal, the green that's on top of the water. We'll talk about what all of these things mean in the Gemara momentarily. The next part of the Mishnah talks about what you may not use for fuel. And those are v'lo b'zefes, v'lo b'shava, v'lo b'shemen kik, v'lo b'shemen sreifa, v'lo b'alya, v'lo b'chelev. You cannot use zefes, shaiva, shemen kik, shemen sreifa, alya, and chelev. Alya is usually translated as tail fat, and chelev is usually translated as intestinal fat, or fat that's on the kidneys. So we'll see all of these things more clearly as we go through the Gemara. Nachum Hamadi Omer, Nachum the Median says, Madlikin b'chelev mevushal. You can use intestinal fat as long as it has been sort of, I guess, cooked before, so it's been melted and then recongealed. He says that's okay. But the Chachamim say, Echad mevushal v'echad she'en mevushal melikin bo. No intestinal fat can be used as fuel for Shabbos candles, even if it's been cooked and melted down and then reconstituted. The Gemara now says, Lechesh shucha da'arza. So the Gemara says, what is lechesh that you may not use as a wick? So that's the shucha da'arza that we talked about before, which is this material between the bark and the wood. So the Gemara initially doesn't understand. The Gemara questions and says, shucha da'arza eitz ba'almahu. The Gemara says, how can you use shucha da'arza, some kind of bark from a cedar tree? That's just like wood. How can you use that to make a wick out of it? So the Gemara clarifies and says, ba'amrenisa de ispe. No, we're talking about the silky material that's just beneath the bark. That can be twisted and plaited into a wick, and that the Mishnah says you cannot use. Now the question is, why can you not use these materials? It seems there could be one of two possibilities. One is because it does not produce a nice flame, which is therefore not covered Shabbos. And another, it could be that it produces a foul smell. And it could also be because the flame may flicker and be in danger of going out, and you may be tempted to to fix it on Shabbos. And that could also be the reason why these things are not usable. Next, let's go on. Below bechosen. What is chosen? Amar Rav Yoseph na'oresh shel pishtan. He says that's some product that you draw from the flax. It's the stringy parts of the flax plant. So you can't make a wick out of that. So Amar le Abaye v'haksiv v'haya hachason lina'ores. But there's a pasuk in Yeshaya that says that chason will turn into na'ores. So you see that chason cannot be na'ores if it says that in the pasuk that it will change into na'ores. So the Gemara answers, Ela Amar Abaye kisna dedayik v'lo. But rather Abaye says, na'ores is processed flax, and chosen is the flax that's beaten but has not been twisted yet. It has not been, not twisted, it has not been unraveled. Meaning that it hasn't been combed or hasn't been spread out. So basically what the pasuk says, when it talks about chason turning into na'ores, it means that something which is very strong because it's unified will be spread out and made weaker. And the pasuk therefore means, in a metaphorical sense, that the strong will become weak, is basically what the pasuk is implying. Okay, let's go on. Velo b'chalach. You're not allowed to use kalach as the material for the wick. Amar Shmuel shaltino l'chol nechusayama va'amri li kulcha shemei. I asked all of the seafarers who've gone to all these exotic places, and they told me that this material is called kulcha. And Rav Yitzchak Bar Zeira Omar Gushkara. Rav Yitzchak Bar Zeira says it's called Gushkara. Now the word Gushkara is a generic term which just means the byproduct or of some kind of manufacturing process. And in this context, it means a certain kind of byproduct of the silkworm that they would use to make certain materials, and even you can make potentially, it's maybe like an inferior kind of silk product that is made from the silkworm or produced by the silkworm that sometimes you can make even like a cheap kind of silk garment out of it, and this may not be used for the wick. Rabin ve'Abaya havu yasvi kamei deravna nechemya achva dereish galusa. That Rabin and Abaya were once sitting in front of this certain distinguished individual, and Chazyeh dahavalovish matkisa. They saw that he was wearing a garment that was made out of this silkworm byproduct. And Armalei Rabin le'Abaya hainu kalach did not. And Rabin says to Abaya, he says, this fabric that you see this guy wearing, that's the kalach that we learned in our Mishnah. So Armalei anon shira parnada karinanlei. Abaya says that's very interesting. We call it shira parnada, that kind of fabric. So Meisvei, the Gemara is now going to challenge what Rabin had just said, that this matkisa is the kalach that we're talking about. It says hashiroyim behakalach behasirkin chayavin betzitzis. That it says shirayim and kalach are chayav in tzitzis. Now, the fact that the Mishnah lists these two things as two disparate kinds of fabric and tells you that both kinds of fabric, if they're made into a four-corner garment, have to have tzitzis put on them, that indicates that this is a tiyuvta to Rabin, who said that this garment that the guy was wearing, that Abaya called a shiora parnada, you see that shirayim is a different kind of fabric from kalach. And how can you tell me that it's the same thing? So the Gemara says, Ibois ema shiora l'chud v'shiora parnada l'chud. One answer could be that there's a difference between shiara, which is the standard shirayim garment, and that's one kind of fabric, and that's different from shiara parnada, which is the garment that Abaye and Rabin were referring to, which is the same thing as kalach. And therefore it's not a contradiction. The Maharshal just adds the words, and another V'bois ema, that the Mishnah is really V'bois ema pirusha kamefarish, that the Mishnah, when it lists shirayim and kalach, they're really the same thing, and one is just defining what the other one is. V'lo b'psila sa'idan. You cannot use the psila sa'idan. What is that? So the Gemara answers achavina. It is a willow branch. Now, how do you make a willow branch into a wick? So this Gemara will illustrate with the following story. Rabin ve'Abaya havu ka'azli b'piksa de Tamrurisa. They were once walking on the plain of Tamrurisa. Chazinu lahanahu arvisa. They saw a certain group of willow branches, and Amalei Rabin le'Abaya hainu idan ditnan. And Rabin says to Abaya, this is the psila sa'idan that we learned in our Mishnah, that you're not allowed to use it for a wick. So Amalei ha he eitz ba'almahu. He says, how could you possibly make a wick out of a willow branch? So Kola Fa'achvile Amranisa de Beni Beni. So a rabbin showed him, he took a willow branch, he peeled off the bark, and he showed him there was a silky material underneath that you could twist into a wick, and that's what he said the Mishnah says you cannot use. Next, V'lo b'fsilas hamidbar, you cannot use the desert wick. What is that? That's called shavra. Rashi says it's a certain kind of grass that could, when it dries out, could be twisted. Below v'yiroka shal pnei hamayim, you cannot use the green stuff that grows on top of water, so which is like pond scum or moss or something like that, right? Algae, that's the word, right? So the Gemara says, Maihi, if you're telling me that it's the regular algae that grows on water, how could you ever gather that to make that into a wick? That would just fall apart and crumble into dust. So Ela Amar Rav Papa uchmasa da arva, but rather it's the green algae that grows on the sides of boats. That's much more substantive, and you could theoretically dry that out and make that into a wick. Tana hosifo lein shel semer v'shel seyar, that there's a brisa that adds two other materials that cannot be used as wicks, and they are wool and hair. So, and the question is, why did our Tana not list those as being possible? The Tana didon semer mechavetz kavitz and serich ruchei michrach. The answer is because our Tana also agrees that they cannot be used as wicks, but it was so self-evident to him that he didn't feel it necessary to write them in the Mishnah. Why? Because wool, michvatz kavitz, it shrivels and does not ignite, and hair also, it just becomes singed, but it doesn't ignite properly. Velo bezephes. Now we get into the things that are not usable for fuel. So zephes, what is zephes? The Gemara says it's zifta. It's what they used, what they called pitch. It was a type of sap that came out of a tree that was combustible, but it wasn't apparently. It wasn't, reliable or as combustible, perhaps, as oil.
Is that what they're using on the table when it says pitch? Is that the same?
It could be. It could be the same pitch that Noach used. I don't know for sure. Sha'ava kerusa, and shava, wax, refers to the wax that we know as, and this is beeswax, of course. It's not paraffin. And Tana adkan pasul psilos mikan veilach pasul shemonim. And so the Brisa just clarifies for that from the word zephis and onwards, even though up until the word zephis we were talking about materials that cannot be used as wicks. From zephis and onwards, we're talking about materials that cannot be used as fuel. The Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? No, because shaiva tzrichale. You need to tell me that wax is only not usable as a fuel, but it is usable as a coating for a wick. If you notice that mahu detema lipsilos nami lo chazir kamash malan, you might have thought that you cannot use it as a coating for your wicks, and therefore the chiddush is that as long as you're not using it as the primary fuel source, you can use it as a coating for the wicks. You know those Hanukkah licht that you buy, the floating wicks? So the little wicks are coated with wax, and yet the fuel is olive oil. That's perfectly fine. That's what the Mishnah, that's what the Gemara is saying. Amar Rami bar Abin atrana pesulta de zifta shaiva pesulta de duvsha. So Rami bar Abin says there's a word called atrana, and that's considered to be the byproduct of zephes, of this pitch that you would extract from the tree. And Rashi explains that it was a clear liquid that after you got out the pitch, sometimes you would be able to, as a byproduct of the manufacture of the pitch, you'd get this clear liquid. And furthermore, wax is the byproduct of honey extraction because of the beeswax. So the Gemara says, "Lamai nafkamina." Why is this information important? The Gemara says it's important because lamekachu memkar. That if two people stipulate that they're going to be selling or buying wax, or if two people stipulate they're going to be selling or buying itrana or atrana, they have to know what the item is, so that if we stipulate that I'm going to sell you shaiva, I'm going to sell you wax, and then I deliver paraffin instead, then I have not fulfilled my end of the bargain. I have to provide you with beeswax. And that's the reason why these terminologies are important in halacha. And on this we'll hold it. Have a wonderful day.